those of you that are new, he's the content manager at Attractions at Answers in Genesis. That's the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum. And he works with them, writes articles, and speaks. And he did all of the presentations in both of the venues there, and tremendous information that he put together. He's also founder of Risen Ministries, and God's really using him there. So let's welcome Mr. Chaffey and really thank the Lord for him.
All right, good morning. Hey, it only took 4 days, but you figured it out. Nice job. It is a good morning, a great morning. And let me get this thing started up, and we'll be rolling. All right, so who remembers what we talked about the last few days? Anyone? You do? What did we talk about? What was it? Evolution, dinosaurs. We talked about dinosaurs yesterday, right? Do you like dinosaurs?
Oh, yeah.
I love them. All right, that's fun. So we are going to be moving on a little bit today, and we're going to talk about something that is a pretty sensitive subject and pretty controversial in our culture today. And that is this issue of the so-called different races of people. And we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about this rather than just what our culture has to say. But before we jump into that, let me tell you about a couple of products that we've got on the back table. And one of the topics, I mentioned it before, my favorite subject to talk about is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I've written a book on that called In Defense of Easter, Answering Critical Challenges to the Resurrection of Jesus. And that goes through many of the evidences we have for the resurrection, and it also looks at all of those alternative theories that skeptics have come up with for 2,000 years trying to disprove or do away with the resurrection. And what I show is that you have nothing to fear if you're a Christian, because they haven't come close to explaining it away, and they never will, because Jesus really did rise from the dead. I've got a talk on the subject as well that's available on DVD, and also a 6-part DVD, or 12-part on 6 DVD series on the crucifixion and resurrection, and going through all of the events that happened during that time and going into detail on all of those. So that's available back there as well. So let's review. Who remembers this slide? Anybody? What do we call this? The 7 C's of history, or world history. So what's the first one? Creation. Then corruption, catastrophe, confusion, Christ, cross, consummation. Now, we spent a lot of time this week on the first 2 so far, creation and corruption. And today we're going to skip the 3rd one and go right to the 4th one. But don't worry, because tomorrow we're going to jump back and do the 3rd one. And there's a reason that we're going in that order. It's because tomorrow I'm going to be talking about the 3rd one in here, and then also expanding on that in the adult classes. So I wanted to keep that on the same day. So today we're going to jump right to the 4th one, to the confusion. So remember, with creation, God made a perfect world, right? And how many people did he make right away? 2. Adam, well, 1 right away, and then he made 1 more, right? Okay. So he made 2, Adam and Eve, and then they had kids, and their kids had kids, and pretty soon you get a whole bunch of people on the earth, and the people were really sinful after a while, and then the world got so bad that God judged the world with a flood, right? Then what happened after the flood? God said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and they said, nope, we're going to be fruitful, and we're going to multiply, but we're not going to fill the earth. We're all going to get together, and we're going to build this city and a tower. We're going to try to make a name for ourselves, and that's what we're going to be talking about today in a little bit. But before we get to that, in the New Testament, Paul is preaching in the city of Athens, the Apostle Paul, and as he's preaching there, he says this, that God hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. God, he's telling them, look, every single person you see, every single person out there is from one blood. We're all related. That's what he's telling them. And God made all these people, and he's determined where they're going to live at what time and the different nations and all of those things. So God's in charge of those things. But you know, it's not just from a biblical worldview where they tell us that we're all one blood. You know, a lot of scientists recognize that as well. Here's one from an article I was reading this morning, or last night, and then again this morning. It says, despite notions to the contrary, there is only one human race. And by the way, this guy is the head of life sciences at a New York university, so I don't think that he's necessarily coming at it from a creationist perspective. He says, our single race is independent of geographic origin, ethnicity, culture, color of skin, or shape of eyes. We all share a single phenotype, the same or similar observable anatomical features and behavior. How many different races are there according to him? One. Okay? But that's not what we hear in the news, is it? We hear something very different. In fact, there are a lot of people in the news who want to keep people divided. They want to keep people arguing and fighting about things. And the Bible tells us that we're supposed to live at peace with one another. We're supposed to love one another. And we need to recognize that we really are all one. Unfortunately, too many people will listen to the voices that are out there telling them, no, you need to separate, you need to fight, you need to keep on battling. But we'll get into that in more detail. But let's ask this question. Do physical features define this term race? And I'm going to put that in quotes because, again, I think there's just one human race. But for the sake of this discussion right here, we're going to use that term, but I'm putting it in quotes. Do physical features define race? Let me ask you this question. What race, from the world's perspective, is this child? African American, you might say? Well, how about this woman? They have a very similar skin tone, don't they? Hers might be a little bit more olive, but as far as the darkness, it's about the same, or lightness, it's about the same. Now look at this child in more context. The child is just African, not African American. But see, if you don't see the whole context, sometimes you don't get the whole picture. But we tend to think, well, if they're very dark, then they're African or African American. If they're light, well, then they're Caucasian. But it's not that simple, because you have other people who are very dark. And where are these people from? Not from Africa. They're actually Asian. They're from India. And this person is very dark. Where is he from? He's from Australia. He's an Aborigine. Okay? And he's not quite as dark as this woman, but much darker than that child is. So being dark doesn't mean that you're from Africa. And how about these people? They're also from Australia, again, very dark. How about these people? They're Pacific Islanders. And these people, they're from Papua New Guinea. Again, very dark people, right? So can we look at somebody's skin color and say, well, they're this race? No. Okay, it doesn't work that way. But too often in our culture, that's what we're told. So maybe it's not just about the skin color, is it? Actually, you know what? Here's something really interesting. Look at the person next to you, and maybe look 2 rows, 2 people down, 3 people down. Do you know we all actually have the exact same color for our skin? We all have the same pigment. We all have the same thing. It's called melanin. Some people have more, some people have less. But we all have the same one. So race is much more than just skin tone. How about, is it hair color? What if you don't have any hair? Is it just skin color? Well, where do you think these ladies are the same as these people? By the way, their hair is not dyed. These little boys are from the Solomon Islands, and that's very natural for them. Look at their arms. They have little whitish hairs all over their arms. Okay, that's natural for them. So it's not hair color. Maybe it's the hair style. You know, like if they're the curly hair like that, naturally curly, and a little more coarse, maybe it's that. Well, except for this guy, what quote-unquote race do you think he might be? Well, he happens to be a Brazilian soccer player. Sorry to show soccer players. It's not really a real sport. It's not like rugby or football, but you know what? I borrowed these pictures from a guy at work, and he likes soccer, so that's where they're coming from. I didn't have time to replace them with real athletes. I'm just teasing, okay? Obviously, I'm not really teasing that much, but maybe it has to do with your height. Because a lot of times people from Asia are very short, right? So maybe it's just your height. But then there's people from Africa, certain tribes that are very tall, like the Dinka and the Maasai tribes. But there's also people from Africa who are very short on average, the Pygmy tribes. And you can see some of the adults there in the front row are very, very short. And they're fully grown. They're not going to get any taller. So it's not about your height either, is it? It's not your hair. It's not your hair color. It's not your height. Maybe it's the shape of your eyes. Isn't that what we're told too? You can tell that somebody might be a certain race because of the shape of their eyes. Where do you think these men and ladies are from? from Asia, right? How about this woman? Actually, this one's also Asia. How about these folks? They have the same shape eye, don't they? They're actually from South America. How about this woman? Native American. How about these people? Say the word one more time. There we go. You got it. These are the Bushmen from Africa, and they have the same shape eye. So you can't just say, oh, it's the shape of the eye that determines race too, can you? It's not that simple. So here they are again. You can see the same shaped eye. And actually, it's the eye itself is the same with all of them. It's just the skin around the eye that causes what they call the almond eye. Where do you think these ladies are from? If you didn't see the woman right in the middle with the little dot in the middle of her forehead, would you be able to tell where they're from? Because they look like they could be from just about anywhere, don't they? They're actually not from India, but close to that. They're from Bangladesh. So right there. So race is not just about skin tone or skin. It's not just about your height or your eye shape or your hair color or hair, the style of the hair. It seems to be a combination of features. So why do we have those combination of features? Usually this is the way the world looks at it. They say, well, if you're from European ancestry, then you're Caucasian. If you're from Asia, then you're Asian. And if you have African ancestry, then you're African. But it's not that simple. They break it down to those categories. Take a look at this. Now these, again, sorry to show soccer players, but these pictures are borrowed from my friend. Now why are they arranged like this? Notice the ones on the top are a little bit lighter, and as you get toward the bottom, they're a little bit more olive color in their skin tone. Do you notice that? They're arranged like that because that's where they come from in Europe. And when you overlay them on the map of Europe, you can see that's generally how the people will look in Europe. Is the further north you get, if you get to like Iceland and the guy on the top left there, or into the Scandinavian countries, be a little lighter, and then as you get toward the Mediterranean, they have a little more olive. You can do the same thing with Africa. In northern Africa, you have more of that Mediterranean and what we call olive skin tone. As you get further south in Africa, you have darker skin. So why is it like this? Why do we see different skin tones in different regions like that? Here's a map showing the population density around the world. So the areas where it's darker red or purple, that's where there's a whole bunch of people living in one small area. Okay, they're just kind of packed in one area. In the areas where it's like light green, there's not a whole lot of people per that area. And then the places where it's gray, there's hardly anybody living there. So why do we have these huge areas, kids? Why are there huge areas where hardly anybody's living? Because what? Some are too cold. That's especially toward the top, and then at the very bottom. Yeah, that's exactly right. Great answer. Why else? Yeah, sometimes deserts, and sometimes they're because of mountains. Take a look at this map. See, there's the one before. Now look at that. You can see where the mountains are. You can see where the deserts are, and you can see that people don't live there. And so what happens is those places, the mountains and the deserts, separate people so that they're not interacting with one another. And so what I talked about the other day, like if you have a group of just tall people go to one area and they're separated from everybody else for a while, what you're going to have is just tall people after a while. Or if you have people who have a little bit darker skin go to one area and they're not interacting with other people, what's going to happen? Pretty soon they're all just going to be darker. Or you can do the same thing with light. And that's what's happened throughout history up until about the last 100 years or so. And what are we seeing in the last 100 years? Because of airplanes and other means of travel where you can get past these deserts, you can get past the oceans pretty quickly, you can get past the mountains and everything, you see a lot more people mixing together, right? And you see a lot more of these traits coming together and mixing. You see a lot more people who don't have just the one or two characteristics that we recognize. We have a lot more people that our world says are mixed races, but they're not mixed races, they're just human beings. Okay, but we're seeing that, and I think it's a beautiful thing. But again, our world tries to separate them like that. So take a look at that guy again, and he's a Brazilian soccer player. There are two people on his team. And look at the different characteristics they have. They're also Brazilian. The guy on the left, we would probably say, well, he's African American. Actually, he's Brazilian. And then the guy on the right, he's Brazilian as well. Why do you see such traits in a nation like Brazil? Well, you have a mixture of the people who were native there. Also, you had some of the slave trade going on, and so that brought people from Africa there, and you had Europeans coming there, and now the people are mixed together, and you see all those traits coming through with those people. We're all one. That's what that's showing us. So how do we explain this? Remember those two different worldviews that we've talked about? From a biblical perspective, how do we explain it compared to how the evolutionary perspective explains that? Because there are problems in our world today, right? We do have issues like racism, and those things are evil. Treating anybody differently because they look different is wrong, and the Bible speaks very clearly against that. That is evil, and unfortunately, that has happened throughout history to all sorts of people groups. We know that in this country, for a long time, people with darker skin were mistreated badly, and that's a terrible thing. We also know that in some areas, in many ways, things have gotten better, but then there's also been laws that haven't been good, and I don't want to get into all of the horrible things. There have been a lot of horrible things, and what I say today is not going to fix everything, but we need to have the right perspective if we ever hope to fix things. Is that true? Yep. Does that make sense? Yep. So how does the Bible answer the problem of racism? Take a look at these kids that are all from one school in Washington. So are they different races? Or are they all just one race, and some have a little more melanin and some have a little less melanin? One race. Now, there are two different perspectives on how we can look at this thing, the creation and the evolutionary view. The evolution view on the right says that all human beings and all apes and everything else out there, all the plants and animals, they're all related and they're all part of this tree that branched from the first living creature. And what they would say is that some groups of people are more closely related to the apes than other people. What do you think that leads to? Is that good? To say some people are more closely related to the apes than others? I'll show you a quote in a little bit where Charles Darwin said something like that. The biblical worldview says, no, people have always been people. All people come from Adam and Eve. All people have the same value, and they're not related to animals at all. That's a very different worldview. Do you see the two different perspectives? Okay, you can't blend those two. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that everybody who is an evolutionist is a racist. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? But their philosophy inherently is racist. J Gould, who was a leading evolutionist from Harvard, he died back in the early 2000s. Here's what he said. Biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. What did he say about racism after evolution was accepted? It went way up. Now, yes, there's always been racism because there's always sin in a person's heart, so there's always going to be problems ever since that first sin. But it went way up after people accepted the evolutionary theory. Do you guys know what the name of Charles Darwin's book is, the one that was really popular, that influenced so many people? It's On the Origin of Species, right? There it is right there, The Origin of Species. That's the name. What's the full title? The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. They don't usually tell you that's the full title, do they? Now, he's speaking primarily of animals in this case, but 12 years later, he wrote a book called The Descent of Man. And here's what he says in there. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. What do you think he's saying? The civilized races, who are they according to Charles Darwin? Caucasian, white people, right? And they're going to exterminate and replace the savage races. Who is he talking about? That's what he meant. Isn't that horrible? But that's what he was saying. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will be then wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian Aborigine and the gorilla. That's Charles Darwin. That is racism. And then Ernst Haeckel, who popularized Darwin's theory throughout Germany, he wrote this: at the lowest stage of human mental development are the Australians. some tribes of the Polynesians, and the Bushmen, Hottentots, and some of the Negro tribes. Do you guys believe that? I don't. Not for a second, because we are all the same. And the Bible speaks very clearly against this, but this is the racism that is inherent in the evolutionary philosophy, that some people are not as good as others, and it's based on skin tone. No. That's nonsense. That is racism, and that comes right out of the evolutionary theory. In fact, after these things were published, do you know there are over 10,000 Australian Aborigines that were slaughtered in the name of science? Because what they would do is they would go and they would capture them, they'd either just kill them, or sometimes they would, after they kill them, they would boil their skulls so they could put their skulls on display in the museums and everything. Over 10,000, just because some scientists were out there saying, oh, they're lesser beings, they're more like apes. And you can find all sorts. Here's Stone Age men discovered on an Antarctic island, missing links with mankind in the early dawn of history. That's what they're calling these human beings, people who are made in the image of God. How about Otabanga, a man who was put on display in a zoo, a pygmy from Africa, was put on display with the chimpanzees in the zoo. It's just a horrible thing. This happened just a little over 100 years ago. And then when he was finally released, he committed suicide. And it's hard to imagine why he wouldn't have any hope after being put on display like that. Guys, that is racism, and that came from an evolutionary philosophy. We want to start our thinking from the Bible. So what does the Bible tell us about the different skin colors that we see? Actually, we're all the same skin color. It's just the amount of different, some have more of that color than others. Let me ask you this question. You ready? This will be a little more lighthearted. We got serious. We're going to get a little more lighthearted for a minute. Can you marry your relation? Who says yes? Okay, I'm in Wisconsin. I'm asking this question. When I'm in Kentucky, no, I'm just kidding. I better not. I won't go there. Can you marry your relation? Yes, no, probably only after counseling. Guys, the answer is yes, because we're all related. From a biblical perspective, we're all related. You just don't want to marry somebody who's really closely related, okay? Somebody who's a little further apart. How many different races are there in the world today? One. How many different races are there in the world today? One. Let's try that again. How many different races in the world today? Okay, I heard this side of the room. I didn't hear anybody in this side of the room. How many different races in the world are there? One. That's correct. We are all the same race. That's what the Bible tells us, and that's why that event at Babel is important. We know that God created Adam and Eve, and then He didn't create other people. And then they had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. People are like, where did all the people come from? Well, keep on reading. Genesis 5:4. Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. And then they had kids, and their kids had kids, and their kids had kids. And then you get the flood, and then God tells Noah and his sons to be fruitful and multiply, and they get together at the tower, at the plain of Shinar. They build the city of Babel and this tower, and God confused their language, which caused them to scatter to different areas of the world. And then those people became separated by the deserts, by the mountains. You had certain characteristics that came to the forefront in those different groups, and that's why we have the different people groups that we see today. They're not different races. We're all the same. You have different people groups and different cultures, but not different races. Now, sadly, some people have tried to use the Bible to promote racism. They misinterpret passages. They yank verses out of their context. They'll say just horrible things like, well, there was a mark that was put on Cain, and that means he was given black skin, and that's why we... No. Or they'll say the same thing about Ham. They'll say there's this curse on Ham. No, there's no such thing as a curse on Ham. Ham wasn't cursed. His son Canaan was, and had nothing to do with the color of his skin. The Bible makes it very clear that we are all created by God. We are all made in God's image. We are all one race, and we are all loved by God. And we all have the same problem, it's sin. And we all need the same solution, that's Jesus Christ. God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And this is the verse we read earlier from Acts 17, that he has made all people of one blood. And then in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son that, what's that word? Whosoever. Does it say whosoever looks like you? No. That whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The gospel is for who? Everyone. Revelation 7:9 talks about this scene in heaven. Look what it says. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes. They're praising God for all eternity. And what do they look like? They look like people from all over the place, from every nation, from every tongue. Isn't that wonderful? That's who the gospel is for. So we can see the reason for the different people groups around the world. And I have to show you this because if you don't believe me yet that we're all one race, you have to see these pictures. You ready for this? Get ready for your mind to be blown. You guys ready? I don't think you're ready. Hey, kids, are you ready to see some of the most amazing pictures you're ever going to see?
Yeah!
Okay, so here we go. Take a look at these two little girls. They are twins. They are twins. There they are with their mom and dad. And yet if you only saw this, you would say, oh, this one girl is African American, this other girl is Caucasian. No, they're twins, born just minutes apart, because their mom and dad both have middle brown skin, and that means you can have anywhere from very light to very dark in their kids, meaning they're the same race. How can you say twin sisters are different races? Wouldn't that be ridiculous? By the way, they're from England, so they wouldn't be American at all. How about these two girls? They're also twins. They're also from England. How about these ones? Two sets of black and white twins in one family. And there's their parents. One's dark and one's light, and you can have that. How about these two that were born in Australia? One dark, one, they're twins. How about these two? They're twins. There's more. These ones I think are from Germany. Guys, this happens a lot in our world today. And if you have people who are in the middle, that middle brown, then you can have light through to dark. That's me, yeah. Notice I am not white. My shirt is white. My skin is not the same color, is it? Okay? Now, we say white and black, but really we're all just different shades of brown, of melanin. Some have more, some have less. So if you have parents who are somewhere in the middle there, they can have kids that are all the way on one side, all the way to the other. So we think that Adam and Eve probably would have been somewhere in the middle. And their kids could have been anywhere from light to dark. And they're all from one family. And in fact, all of us originally are from that family. And we don't have time to get into the technical details, but when you get into genetics, and this is just a simplified way of doing it, if the parents just are dark, most likely their kids are just going to be dark. If the parents are just very light, most likely the kids are going to be very light. But if they are in the middle and they have a mixture of those genetics, you can get middle brown, you get anywhere from dark through light in just one generation. And so this is in biology, you'll learn about Punnett squares and everything. So you can get, some have less melanin, some have more melanin. It's not different races. Okay, does that make sense, guys? Let me ask you this question again. How many different races are there? One. Unfortunately, in our world today, there are a lot of people who want to divide you, and they want to have people who are fighting all the time. But we're one, and we need to recognize that. Yeah, that doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't mean that there never were problems, that all just goes away. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to understand this truth if we ever want to solve the problem. If we continue to divide people, it's never going to be solved. All humans belong to one race. In fact, this is not just creationist saying. Dr. Venter, the head of Celera Genomics Corporation and scientists at the National Institutes of Health, recently announced that they had put together a draft of the entire sequence of the human genome, and the researchers had unanimously declared there is only one race, the human race. That's from the year 2000. Scientists have known this for over 20 years. Here's from 1998. From ABC News, this has probably been pulled down recently. What the facts show us is that there are differences among us, but they stem from culture, not race. Because we're one race. And so we think, like I mentioned before, we think Adam and Eve probably would have been middle brown. We think Noah and his family probably, for the most part, would have been middle brown. And that's how we portray them at the Ark Encounter. And you can see some of those things that we just talked about. So all human beings belong to the one race, but spiritually speaking, there are two races. Those who have placed their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and have been forgiven of their sins are going to dwell eternally with the Lord, and those who have rejected him, have not trusted in Christ yet. So spiritually speaking, there are two races, those who have been saved and those who have not been saved. Our job is to love the Lord with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, love our neighbor as ourselves. We need to go out and share the gospel message of Jesus Christ with those who need to hear it, because we don't want there to be a lot of people that are lost. So that's why Christ came, to seek and to save that which is lost. That's our job, to proclaim the gospel message to every human being. Doesn't matter what they look like, because they're all related to us. They're all family members. Whether you like it or not, that means you guys are related to me. I like that. Well, thank you. I knew I had a favorite person in here besides my wife. And then we know what happened 3 days later after Jesus died on the cross for our sins. He rose from the dead and showed himself alive. So I think we are going to wrap it up right there. Well, how many different races are there of humans? One race, biologically, okay? But from a spiritual sense, two, yes, okay? So how many different races are there for humans? One. But then there are saved people and there are lost people, but they are both human beings. They are both made in the image of God, and Jesus Christ died on the cross for them as well, and we need to tell them that. We need to share the gospel with them. Does that make sense, guys? Yes. Okay, one more time. How many different races are there? One! Thank you. I hope you understand that. That is very important for us to get in our world today.